Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Time for Trump's tariffs. Companies, shoppers and farmers across the United States brace themselves for 25% levies on imports from Canada and Mexico.
Our other headlines: black boxes are recovered from the Washington plane crash with questions over air traffic control staffing and recent near misses.
Hamas names the next 3 hostages to be released under the prisoner swap deal with Israel.
5 years since Brexit, businesses in the UK tell us they're still feeling the impact of departure from the EU. And
2025 is the year of the snake. Up next, I'm getting up close and personal with a python.
Companies, consumers and farmers across the United States are bracing themselves for 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico from Saturday.
President Trump says the move is aimed at addressing the large numbers of undocumented migrants and the fentanyl that comes across United States borders, as well as trade deficits with its neighbours. He's also suggested that he was still planning to impose new tariffs on China.
Look, Mexico and Canada have never been good to us on trade. They treated us very unfairly on trade. And we will be able to make that up very quickly because we don't need the products that they have. We have all the oil you need. We have all the trees you need, meaning the lumber. We have more than almost anybody in those 2 categories. In oil, we have more than anybody, and we don't need anybody's trees. We have to free up some of the tree areas that we have. We have great lumber in this country. We have to free them up environmentally, which I can do very quickly. But we don't need what they have.
Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who joins us now from New York. John, so just 1 day to go till these tariffs start. I mean, are they definitely going to go ahead?
Well, he says they're coming, so we got to believe that they are. 13 hours to go until this will kick in, if indeed it kicks in. And let me try to explain some of the background to this. I think this is a couple of slightly unusual targets for tariffs to go first, really. But I know he said he would put 25% on Mexico and Canada on that first day in the Oval Office a couple of weeks ago. But you've got to remember, Mexico and Canada buy more stuff from the United States than any other countries in the world, or at least they're right up there. And so now we're facing 25% tariffs in the next couple of hours on pretty much all goods. And a couple of things just to help you understand what it would be. The Super Bowl is coming up, not this Sunday, but the Sunday after. And when we have the Super Bowl, the great dish that people eat is chips and guacamole. And guacamole is made out of avocados. 90% of all the avocados here come in from Mexico. So that particular dish at the Super Bowl in just over a week's time could be much more expensive because of this. And from Canada, of course, we get autos, many of them made on behalf of the big 3 in Detroit, also oil. And as you heard President Trump there in that clip say, lumber as well, which means trees. Most of the houses in America are built out of wood, which is why so many of them burnt in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago. I have to be honest with you, the precise target of the tariffs is not clear to anybody here. I mean, President Trump in that clip said, you know, we have enough of our own trees and our oil, we don't need yours. I am hearing that oil from Canada might be excluded. This is the latest drop of news. We'll have to see whether that is true or not. Canada is saying, well, we'll retaliate. Justin Trudeau, who for the time being is the Prime Minister of Canada, he's on his way out, as you know, he said everything's on the table when it comes to retaliation. And Mexico is saying, go ahead, put your tariffs on, you'll only hurt yourself. And that is because there's so many American companies making stuff in Mexico and then bringing it back across the border. Now, what's odd about all of this, Paul, is that President Trump was really angry yesterday, and I reported this on our program, when the Federal Reserve did not move on interest rates. He wants lower interest rates, and he didn't get it, and he was really angry, as we reported yesterday. But at the same time, he's devoted to these tariffs, and many people think that that's only going to increase inflation here, because what's likely to happen is the importers of the avocados, for example, will only pass the price hikes on to the consumer. So a lot of people on Wall Street think that this is still a negotiating tactic with 13 hours to go. I will tell you that economists are split every which way to Sunday. I mean, everybody tells you something different. Some say this will be inflationary, others say it won't be inflationary. And finally, I should point out that no one's talking about China yet, okay, nor the European Union, where you are. We think they're coming. In China's case, I think the deadline is the 9th of April. So China's not off the hook yet, but the smart money here has it that any tariffs applied to Chinese goods will be a lot less than was touted in the election. 60% then, thought now to be more like 10%, but we'll have to see.
Proof will be in the pudding, as they say. Let's talk inflation, John. Some fresh data out, PCE.
Fan favorite. You know, in America, if you go to a football match, the announcer always says, and the fan favorites are available. And what they mean is chicken wings sold in the stands. Well, this is not a fan favorite, but a Fed favorite. Fed favorite, because the Federal Reserve has just had its favorite measure of looking at inflation. It's called PCE, Personal Consumption and Expenditure, and the Fed likes it more than CPI and PPI because it is actually more detailed. Now, this release this morning before the market opened here came 2 days after that unchanged decision by the Federal Reserve that so angered President Trump. And inflation at PCE level in December was up 0.2%, 2.8% for the year as a whole. And that's bang in line with Wall Street expectations. Now, labor costs fell to their slowest since 2021. That's, what is that, 3 or 4 years now. And personal spending is up 0.7%, not 0.5%, as been expected. Now, that presents a problem to the Fed, because if they do want to move on interest rates, cutting them lower next time round, this personal spending going on is going to be, call that into question. So we put that then alongside Apple turning in an overall increase in sales yesterday, despite being outsold on the iPhone in China by Huawei and Vivo. Apple shares up 1.4%. Intel, the chip maker, down 0.5% today, turning in better than expected earnings, but still no talk about its CEO. In the oil patch, Chevron is down 4% after its first loss in 4 years. Exxon is down 1.2%. Now, they beat Wall Street expectations. I suspect that's in sympathy with Chevron. Next week, Alibaba and Alphabet, Google, will give us their earnings. And the markets are all in the green at the moment, buoyed by PCE, which I just told you about, and by the earnings from Apple. And finally, Jensen Huang, the boss of NVIDIA, it's just been revealed, is meeting with President Trump today. NVIDIA is in the vanguard of developing these very expensive AI chips. We've got NVIDIA shares up 1.5% here at the moment. He said he was quite happy to meet President Trump. Today he will. We know what the topics are going to be. It'll be tariffs, particularly against China, and DeepSeek, as the shine continues to come off that company, as more and more investigations are launched to see whether they built that equivalent to ChatGPT actually using NVIDIA high-end microchips, which were imported from Singapore. Guys?
John, thank you so much for bringing us right up to date from Wall Street. John Terrett.
Germany's annual inflation rate slowed in January in a welcome surprise for both consumers and the European Central Bank. The figure fell 2.3%, down from 2.6% in December. Elsewhere in the Eurozone, France's annual rate of inflation held steady at 1.8%, keeping it below the ECB's 2% target.
The London Stock Exchange is tipped for its best month in more than 2 years, as Britain's benchmark index hit a record high. The gains were largely driven by President Trump's decision to hold off on imposing trade tariffs after taking office. UK investors are preparing for the Bank of England's rate decision next week.
The pharmaceutical giant Novartis says its sales rose by 16% in the fourth quarter, more than expected. The company says growth had been driven by strong demand for its arthritis and heart drugs. Its top-selling drug, Entresto, brought in nearly $8 billion in revenue last year.
SoftBank is looking to invest up to $25 billion in Microsoft-backed OpenAI, the company behind popular artificial intelligence platform ChatGPT. Sources say the Japanese conglomerate is expanding its portfolio. The investment would support OpenAI's commitment to Stargate, a joint venture between SoftBank, Oracle and OpenAI, aimed at helping the US maintain its lead in AI.
Syria's interim government has announced plans to sack a third of public sector workers and privatise more than 100 state-run companies. The new leadership says it wants to create a competitive free market economy in Syria after the ousting of President Assad. However, transitional head of state Ahmed al-Shara says assets considered to be of strategic interest will be kept in public hands.
Investigators have found the black boxes from the American Airlines jet that collided with a military helicopter in Washington.
It's hoped they will begin to piece together the moments leading up to the crash, which killed all 67 passengers on board the two aircraft. At least 40 bodies have been pulled from the river, and recovery efforts are continuing.
Our correspondent Jim Spellman reports from Washington.
So the dive teams stopped yesterday at dark, not safe enough for them to be in the water after dark. Those operations beginning again today, and we understand the numbers of bodies recovered is rising from that 40 figure. We don't have an exact amount. At this point, at some point, we expect a crane to be part of this operation to remove some of the debris so divers can get to some of those final bodies trapped under the water here. You mentioned the black boxes have been recovered from the plane. That's the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. That will provide valuable information for the National Transportation Safety Board as they conduct their investigations. The black boxes not yet retrieved from the helicopter, though the NTSB says they know where they are. There will not be a problem to retrieve them. They'll need DOD, Department of Defense, assistance with that, so that may happen sometime today. One of the things they'll be looking at from these black boxes is the altitude at which this accident happened, because much of this investigation is now focused on at what height was the helicopter traveling. They have these channels that are arranged for helicopters here to travel along the Potomac River at no higher than 200 feet, but we understand that the helicopter was well above that, and in fact, Donald Trump posting on social media just about an hour ago that it was, he called it that it was well above that limit. So that's something that the investigation is focused on. And as although this works it out, just in the last hour or so, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has suspended helicopter flights around Reagan National Airport indefinitely. We don't know exactly what the limits of that are, but putting that in place as a precaution, Paul.
And Jim, of course, it's so important to emphasise that the official investigation is really in its very earliest stages. But there are these slightly concerning reports emerging about near misses at the airport and understaffing in air traffic control.
These systemic issues are certainly part of the investigation as well. We understand that there was only one air traffic controller that was taking care of both helicopter traffic and airplane traffic. There, generally speaking, would be two people, one each handling the different types of aircraft until about 9:30 at night, but at manager's discretion, depending on traffic and conditions, they can bring it down to just one earlier. That apparently happened the night of the crash. No indication yet whether that's relevant to what actually happened here, but it's certainly an issue that people are looking at, which is part of this larger shortage of air traffic controllers that was made worse during COVID and that is perpetually being made worse now by this boom in air travel after COVID. Now, another issue is traffic here. I mean, there's so many planes in and out of here and helicopter traffic up and down. And we understand that Tuesday night, just one day before this crash, there was another potential near miss where a pilot had to divert because of a helicopter in its landing flight path. And if you go back to the 80s, more than a dozen situations where flights have had to what they had called near misses, and they've 10 of those because of military aircraft, 7 of those because of helicopters. So a lot of issues for investigators to look at here, short-term and long-term, Paul.
Hamas has named the next 3 hostages it plans to release as part of the prisoner exchange with Israel.
The 3 men are American-Israeli Keith Siegel, Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas, who is the father of the youngest hostages taken on October the 7th. This will be the 4th exchange since the Israel-Hamas ceasefire.
Well, it's sent shockwaves across Europe and toppled 2 prime ministers in the UK.
5 years after Britain left the European Union, the impact of Brexit is still being felt as the country tries to reshape its economy outside the EU.
Siobhan McCall looks back at how we got here.
On June 23, 2016, the UK held a referendum and narrowly voted to leave the European Union. Prime Minister David Cameron, who had opposed Brexit, resigned the next day.
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
Theresa May took over, and in March 2017 she triggered Article 50, giving the UK 2 years to leave the EU. Theresa May tried and failed to get her Brexit withdrawal agreement through Parliament 3 times, ending in her resignation.
I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
On May 24, 2019, she announced she would be stepping down. Boris Johnson then took over, and the Brexit withdrawal agreement was signed on January 24, 2020.
We're going to get Brexit done.
Brexit officially took place an hour before midnight on January 31st, 2020. The UK is the only sovereign country to have left the European Union.
Well, the decision to leave the European Union and withdraw from the single market has had a major impact on UK trade and British businesses.
Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid has been following the story. So 5 years on, are the impacts of Brexit clear?
Trade, immigration, travel, laws, EU regulations, some of them have been ditched, lots of them haven't, and cost and money. And let's start with that, because one of the perks, I suppose, one of the benefits would have been that, you know, the $23 billion now, which the UK doesn't have to pay into the EU funds as it used to. The business minister a year ago, before the election, was Kemi Badenoch, who's now the leader of the opposition. And she and her department, the Business and Trade, came out with a report just 12 months ago saying Britain's Brexit success. And they list the fact that exports are growing, they claim, almost $1,100 billion. They said that the growth in the UK is better than Germany, better than Japan, better than Italy, and equal to France. We've heard the current government say the same. They can do the free trade agreements with any country it likes. They've done it with Australia and New Zealand. They're pursuing India and the United States. And also that the perceived global influence and trade in the EU will only be 9% by 2050, down from a third of what it used to be in 1973 when the UK joined the common market, as it was called then. So all that is good. But the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, the independent official forecaster for the UK, you know, quite staggering numbers, really, that import of goods and services have been reduced and exports reduced by 15%. That's about 4% of the entire GDP. That's equivalent in today's money to $125 billion US. That's the direct hit for the economy, according to the OBR. Most politicians last year, when we were talking about the general election, they didn't want to talk about or even utter the word Brexit. Things have changed. They are now looking for a reset. But the two big problems, immigration, because everybody who comes here from the EU or from non-EU countries have to have a work visa. So illegal immigration has shot up. And that's a political problem, and it's obviously a cost problem as well. And then trade, back to trade, which is probably the biggest influence of all 5 years on from Brexit, and that is the impact on smaller companies, which is around half of the private economy in the UK, 5.5 million companies. Many of them decided not to export, but we spoke to one company that wanted to export, but of course there are issues, there are costs, and there is the problem. It's problematic to export now to the European Union. And this is the story that we had.
There's been a huge change in the landscape of how to run a small business.
Creative Nature is a food company preparing and selling gluten and dairy-free snacks, safe for people with allergies or diet restrictions.
We used to import a lot prior to Brexit. However, because supply chain is quite volatile, it's quite expensive and you have to buy so much at a time, we decided to use a lot of UK suppliers and importers directly.
Everything is produced in a factory in the north of England, but all the management and delivery orders are done from its base in London.
We want to be growing our exports alongside our UK business. The cost to entry can be high, and I do think that's a barrier and a challenge for businesses, especially with a team of sort of 8 or 9 people at the time.
Businesses and people in Britain have had to adapt to trade barriers and new regulations. Despite that, an UK Parliament report in January says 41% of the UK's total export of services and goods in 2023 was still with the European Union.
New figures are expected in February.
But up until last November, data by the UK's Office for National Statistics revealed that the value of goods exported from Britain last year rose by $490 million. But to countries outside the EU, not member states inside the single market. British goods inside the European Union fell by $250 million. With more than 5.5 million small and medium-sized companies operating in the UK, it is a significant part of the economy. Tens of thousands of these companies say they still have aspirations to export.
There will continue to be quite significant trade barriers to UK exporters going into the EU, particularly for smaller businesses, and they will just have to work around those. Some will stop exporting, some will find their ways around the barriers. The UK will be affected by that. You'll also see growth, for example, in services trade where there are fewer barriers at play.
I believe even if I was to set up a new business again, I would want to export from day one because of the opportunity that's out there for our products.
It is challenging times for the UK economy, but this company hopes with a product that has a growing presence in the Middle East, in Australia and the EU to carry on exporting. Yolo Abdavid, CGTN, London.
All right, well, let's get the picture from the European Union. Our correspondent in Brussels, Will Denslow, joins us now. Will, the impact of Brexit has been felt from within the EU too, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Over the past 5 years, though, Brussels has sought to steer its own course, but the fates of the EU and the UK remain very much interwoven. And in recent months, there have been signs that the two are moving close together, evidenced by the fact that Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, will be here in Brussels for a meeting of fellow European leaders to discuss big foreign policy issues. There has also been movement such as plans on ideas such as pan-European customs programme. The issue of youth mobility is also a potential area of future cooperation.
The full effect of Brexit will be studied for years, but for students the impact is clear-cut. The UK shelved its participation in the EU's Erasmus Plus student exchange programme. The University of Ghent still has arrangements with 22 UK universities, but student participation is half of what it once was.
Administrative steps have increased and have made it increasingly difficult for students to really make sure that this is in place before they leave for the UK, and as and specifically for internships, these steps have turned out to be very complicated and in a lot of cases unfeasible for students.
While demand remains, rising costs and burdensome administrative processes are barriers for many students on both sides of the Channel. Students at this university are already applying for exchanges scheduled for September and even February 2026.
Lawmakers here in Brussels are working on ways to boost mobility for young people. Polling suggests 51% of British voters are in favour of rejoining Erasmus+, with 15% opposing the move.
The Liberal Democrats back the plan, but the Labour government says the UK currently has no plans to rejoin the programme. The European Union has separately floated a plan to open pathways for young people to spend longer periods of time overseas, without necessarily being strictly tied to a job, educational programme or training programme. That has also been rejected by London. Some EU lawmakers blame the politics that still surround Brexit, especially the issue of migration.
I think that since the UK left the European Union, immigration has increased. I think it is a subject that is politically manipulated, instrumentalized. Erasmus Plus, yes, it is about mobility. Young people can arrive in the country, but I think some companies would be very happy to have young Europeans back.
The UK replaced Erasmus Plus with its own system called Turing in 2021, boasting exchanges around the world, and not just in Europe. For the 2024-25 academic year, the programme is offering roughly $140 million for overseas educational placements. But some say the programme has led to increased bureaucracy for universities and a lack of opportunity for European students.
what Turing does is, whilst allowing that kind of outgoing study, it doesn't fund incoming study. And that leads to, from our perspective, a tension between students and universities, obviously because there's less places, but also between university and university.
More than 15 million people have participated in the Erasmus Plus programme since it launched in 1987. But for now, at least, the UK's participation is consigned to the history books. William Denslow, CGTN, Brussels.
Great pleasure to welcome Vicky Pryce, the international economist and business consultant. Vicky, what's your assessment of these past 5 years?
Well, what we do know is that the population has not seen any great sort of advantage of having left the EU. And in fact, a recent opinion poll suggests that the majority think that it was a mistake, and quite a lot of them would like us to go back in. The real problem, of course, and they're sensing it, is that the economy hasn't really done particularly well. Businesses know that they've lost out in terms of trade to the EU. We've seen the trade intensity of the UK go down when it's gone up since COVID, in particular in other countries. So we've been left behind, and that's a real issue. And businesses have not invested anything like as much as they should have done since the Brexit vote. A lot of uncertainty for a number of years about exactly how we're going to leave, what it was all going to mean. And we are seeing that in terms of productivity and longer-term growth.
The UK Labour government says it wants to reset the relationship with the European Union. What does that look like? What does that mean? What might it mean?
For the moment, it's quite limited. It just means we'd like to cooperate in various areas. I mean, remember, we have actually rejoined the Horizon programme, so at least our scientists and academics can now work more closely again. We're paying something in, about $2.5 billion a year to be members of that, but traditionally we've received a lot of benefits as well because more money is being paid to us because we have some very, very good universities. So we've rejoined that. We're talking about having a lot closer relationships on the defence side, which of course is very important right now given the geopolitics that Europe is going through. Other stuff, though, is more limited. It's got to do with trade, how you can facilitate trade, given that there are restrictions there right now, partly because of regulatory requirements, no tariffs on goods, and yet you have to produce all sorts of papers to show, you know, where did the bits that have gone into your production come from, so the rules of origin, you've got regulations in terms of, and you need to prove it, in terms of both importing and exporting agricultural products, animal products. So that's been pretty bad for many small and medium-sized enterprises. They've just stopped doing anything with Europe, and if that is the case, if there is less trade, less competition, then you end up with less productivity too. So if you can fix some of those things, you can move a certain way, but actually you need an awful lot more. And one hopes, against hope perhaps, that when the trade and cooperation agreement is redone in 2026, we're beginning to negotiate it now, we need to renegotiate it, there could be something more, including movement of people. I think that would be so important.
I mean, the calls to rejoin the EU have never really gone away, have they? I mean, is that realistic?
It's going to take some time, but there are already calls, of course, on rejoining in a partial way. There are a number of countries that have either customs agreements with the EU, or they're in the single market. Of course, Labour has come to power, the current government saying no single market, no customs union, which is pretty limiting. But you can play around with it and be part of it. I mean, look at Switzerland. It's not really a member of anything, really, and yet it allows free movement, it abides by all the regulations, because it knows it needs to. So probably then, I think, that we'll join through the back door, if you like. Hope no one notices, and then carry on.
Vicky, good to see you. Thank you very much for coming to see us. Vicky Pryce, the international economist and business consultant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ukraine has launched its second drone attack this week on oil refineries in Russia. The region's governor said the facility in Volgograd caught fire after a drone attack by Kyiv. Russia's military says it's captured another village in eastern Ukraine as it advances on the strategically important city of Pokrovsk. Uganda has confirmed the outbreak of a deadly new strain of the Ebola virus. A male nurse died in the capital, Kampala, on Wednesday. It's the 8th recorded Ebola outbreak in Uganda since the first infection in 2000. After hours of delays, Germany's parliament has, just moments ago, voted to reject a bill on controlling migration. The leader of the Conservative CDU party has insisted the legislation is necessary following knife attacks in the country. That's despite criticism from within his own party for relying on support from far-right party, the AFD. If passed, the bill would still have to go to the upper chamber and would not have been ratified before the election in February.
2025 is the year of the snake. The creature represents change and opportunity in Chinese culture, but in the West, it's a symbol of danger. So where does that leave us for the next 12 months? Our correspondent Michael Marillier went looking for answers, and just a warning, you might want to go and hide.
Deceptive, devious, deadly.
Let's be honest, snakes don't have the best reputation. But what are they really like? I've decided to find out for myself. I've come to a wildlife park in rural England, and I'm meeting someone special. His name is Macaroni. He's a royal python. I don't normally wear ties, but it seems Macaroni is insisting on it.
The rattlesnakes in here. It's very impressive.
Biologist Meg Howard looks after Macaroni and his slithery friends. She says most people fear snakes because they don't understand them.
They're not evil, they're not cunning, they're not conniving, they're not plotting your demise, they're not after your downfall, they're not thinking, oh, they look tasty, I'm going to bite them. They are just existing, and if you're calm and you respect them, they will be calm and they'll respect them back.
Poachers often hunt snakes for their skins, with the leather turned into high-value items like belts and handbags. But I can't understand why anyone would kill a friendly guy like Macaroni. He's so calm, peaceful. When you feel him, the texture is just so smooth and natural. I think maybe I'm starting to think a little bit differently about these guys. In China, snakes represent transformation, as they shed their skin an average of 2 to 4 times a year. And maybe there's something to that. After all, who doesn't like a fresh start?
A lot of people say new year, new me, don't they? So it's a bit like you're shedding a skin, starting as a new person.
It is a new year, so maybe it's time for some new ideas. Sure, snakes may seem unfriendly, even perhaps cold-blooded, but 2025 is their year. A chance for them to make history. Michael Marillier, CGTN, Burford, England.
Brave man.
He was eaten shortly afterwards.
The headlines again. Time for Trump's tariffs. Companies, shoppers and farmers across the United States brace themselves for 25% levies on imports from Canada and Mexico.
Our other headlines: black boxes are recovered from the Washington plane crash with questions over air traffic control staffing and recent near misses.
And 5 years since Brexit, businesses in the UK say they're still feeling the impact of departure from the EU.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Traces of China. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.